NBA draft, top 3. Everybody kind of thinks they know the order. LaMelo, Wiseman, Edwards, something within that variation. Where do you think each player goes and why?
So I think if we're basing it talent-wise, my first pick, and this is if you asked me even 6 months ago, I would have been singing a completely different tune. But I think that LaMelo Ball is the most talented player in the draft. So if we're basing it just on talent, I think you'd be a fool not to pick LaMelo. I think he's grown so much from a lot of the drama and missteps that you saw from him in high school. And when he went down to, I believe it was the NBL, the Australian Basketball League, he really showed that he could play with pros. And that's something that granted, they're not at the same stage in life. We saw that from Luka and saw how well he played in his professional league, and it came over and translated. And I feel like usually when you get a player playing well in a professional league overseas, it translates. It's a different level. You can't even compare college basketball to professional. As much as they're all great athletes, some of those guys don't even have aspirations to be pro. When you look at the NBL, all those guys are making a living playing basketball. So even though it's a step below the NBA, I think it said a lot about how well he played in that league. But with all that being said, and as impressed as I've been with him, there's still the concerns. One, the family history. And as much as I love Lonzo, it's followed him. And he's even tried to distance himself from it. And it's still caught up with him time and time again. So is that going to be a problem with LaMelo, who was an even bigger personality than Lonzo was? Is he going to be able to make it in a big market like a New York? Or is he going to get caught up in the shining lights like Lonzo in LA by the media circus? So that is my big question with LaMelo. Can he separate himself from the Ball family drama? If he can do that and can play like he played in the NBL, I think he is surefire number 1 pick. I think he will be a superstar in the league. He has all the tools, and he is what the game is becoming, a 6'7" point guard that can shoot the basketball. That is what the game is becoming. Size, can shoot, a playmaker. I mean, look at the playoffs. Look at who succeeded. Who came out on top was the guy, LeBron James, the playmaker. He can make a play for anybody. And I'm not comparing LeBron to LaMelo, but at the end of the day, it takes playmakers to win games, and I think that he is that dude.
Yeah, you made a good point about their family history and how outspoken LaVar has been. But I think I read somewhere that LaVar had an opinion about the Warriors and LaMelo, basically saying the Warriors would be foolish to not pick LaMelo, something along those lines. And LaMelo basically said that his dad has his own opinions and he has his. So I think he's starting to separate himself, but I agree. I think Minnesota should take LaMelo Ball first. And the reason is because you have D'Lo, who's really a 2. D'Lo's really a 2.
I agree with
He's not really a 1. You already have Malik Beasley. So it wouldn't make sense to draft Anthony Edwards there.
And you have Karl Towns as a big.
Exactly.
So.
It wouldn't make sense to draft James Wiseman there. It wouldn't make sense to draft Anthony Edwards there. It makes sense to draft LaMelo because he's a playmaker. He can set up for D'Lo, for Beasley, for Towns. The biggest question mark about him is going to be his motor and his defense.
And just to play off that point is you're talking about the Minnesota Timberwolves, who is the same team that Jimmy Butler was there 2 years ago and took the practice squad and wiped the floor with them, and the motor for that team has been a question mark since then. I mean, and do I think that, maybe things have changed over the past few years? Of course they could have, but I think in some aspects Karl Towns is still the same dude he was, and although they got rid of Andrew Wiggins, they brought in D'Angelo Russell, and I love D'Angelo Russell, but he's also had those question marks. So that's a concern. And it's more concerning that you're putting him in a group that doesn't have that veteran presence like a Jimmy Butler, ironically enough, who left there to steer him in the right direction.
And a starting lineup of LaMelo, D'Lo, Beasley, and Towns just sounds like a defensive disaster. It really just sounds like a defensive disaster. They're going to put up a bunch of points, but they might not be able to stop anybody.
Yeah.
And so I think Minnesota has a lot of work cut out for them. I don't think this pick is going to be the answer to all their questions and problems. It's definitely not. This draft is a weird draft because there's not a surefire number one pick. LaMelo has upside to become like a superstar, but he's not one of those players that we're almost 100% certain he's going to become a superstar. Yeah. In certain drafts, we're kind of sure.
Like, you look at last year. I mean, the top
we knew
three
Ja was going to be a star.
I could have told you the top 3 picks from February. I'll even say March. Once March Madness hit and you saw what Ja Morant was doing in the tournament, you would have been a madman not to say Zion at 1, Ja at 2, and RJ at 3, or at least some combination of those 3 guys at 1, 2, 3. And then even the next, 4 through 10 were fairly predictable. You knew who was going to go in that crop. Yeah. And I feel like this draft, you might as well just throw darts.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Golden State has a number 2 pick. And for me, I think they trade out of the pick. Because who are they going to draft? Anthony Edwards. They said there will report, I think, from this guy named Wes Goldberg, who's like an insider for the Warriors. He covers the Warriors. And he said that the Warriors aren't high on Wiseman. They're more higher on Onyeka. And I don't even want to try to pronounce his last name. But the center from USC. They're more higher on the center from USC. So, obviously, it always bothers me when the Warriors aren't high on a player because it always tells me something about that player. If the Warriors aren't high on you, a team that is almost 100% confident they can develop any scrub into a star, then I'm not high on you either as a prospect. And that's why I think Anthony Edwards, does he fit Golden State? Not really. There were reports that they actually want to trade out of the pick and draft Devin Vassell, which would be like a good fit for them, like a good wing guy. So, but I do think Anthony Edwards will be the surefire number 2 pick or number 1 pick. It just really depends.
Yeah, I see Anthony Edwards, as much as he's listed more as a small forward, I see him as more of a really bigger, explosive shooting guard. Mm-hmm. Like, I think he's a scorer more than anything, and the Warriors definitely do not need that. They need more, in my opinion, they need more of either a big man or a grinded-out defensive-centered wing, which there were a lot of last draft, and, of course, now they have the pick and there's none of them there. But I do think if they can drop down within the top 10 but late, where they can still get Onyeka and, maybe bring in some other assets in that deal, I think that would be an A+ for them if they are higher on him. I would have thought that James Wiseman would be the obvious pick.
Me too. Because that's the hole that you see on the roster.
Yeah, and if you look at him back in high school, he was the guy. Like, there were people saying that by the time he left Memphis, he could be the latest greatest prospect, the best since LeBron, and it just didn't pan out. He goes to Memphis.
He should have been in this draft for DeAndre Ayton was in 2018.
100%. But he goes to Memphis, he gets caught up in that scandal and ends up essentially dropping out and preparing for the draft. And I feel like that really hurt his draft stock. And people are talking about, other options from college basketball and making your way to the pros. But at the end of the day, the best way to get eyeballs on you is playing college basketball and being successful. Because people watch March Madness. And people look at Carson Edwards from Purdue, just a year ago. Nobody really knew about. He was known, but he probably would not have been a first-round pick without his March Madness performance. And he goes in, lights the world on fire, and becomes a first-round pick.
And that happens with a lot of players. Exactly. Look at Dante DiVincenzo. Happened with him too.
Yeah. Ja Morant really solidified himself as the number 2 pick, I feel like, performing against big-time teams in the tournament. So I think that missing that college season really hurt him, especially in a year that a lot of people, myself included, thought Memphis would be a power player come March, and they fell apart. And he was the first domino in that.
If you're on the clock, hypothetically, let's just say hypothetically, because the Hornets got the 3rd pick, right? Edwards.
The Hornets need anybody. They have no solidified positions.
Edwards and Wiseman are on the board. Who are you taking if you're the Hornets? Are you taking James Wiseman or are you taking Anthony Edwards?
Personally, I'm taking Edwards just because I think there's less question marks around him. I feel like he's a more sure pick. I feel like I know what I'm getting out of him more than I am from Wiseman, especially because Wiseman is something that you don't really see in the league. It's becoming the trend, 7'1", 240. He could step out and shoot it, and he plays almost more like a wing than a big. But I think that Edwards is the more prototypical what you see in a superstar. You know, he's incredibly explosive, can jump out the gym. He defends, he scores, and that is what's been running the league for the past decade. Look at the best players, and again, I'm not comparing these guys, but LeBron James, Kawhi Leonard, Kevin Durant, all the best players in the league, for the most part, have been two-way wings. Even James Harden has developed his defensive side of the ball. Two-way wings dominate the league.
But do you think that Anthony Edwards is that good defensively? Because from what I've seen in college, that was like the area he struggled in. Like, he has all the physical tools to be a good defender, but he hasn't been one.
And that's my thing, is he has the tools, and getting into an NBA program, and a lot depends on where he lands, because I think that the Miami Heat this year were the best example. It doesn't matter what you are as a prospect, you got to land in the right spot, because Tyler Hero and Duncan Robinson, if they landed in Charlotte, you wouldn't be hearing their name. But going to Miami turned them into legit star candidates.
I wish Atlanta would have had the number 2 pick and drafted Edwards. I feel like Atlanta would be the perfect spot for him.
They're building something very nice over there, and it would have been a great fit. And for Edwards, you know, if he ends up being a Warrior, there's no place better for him, because they have the best player development in the league, in my opinion. So that would be an A+ win. The Timberwolves, you know, we've seen they've been hit or miss. They had Karl Towns, who I think that he would have been a star no matter where he went, but then they also had a couple of guys that they messed up on.
They've been horrible at drafting.
Yeah, Zach LaVine ends up going to Chicago, getting much better. Andrew Wiggins, I don't even want to get into that pick. And Charlotte,
Wesley Johnson.
What do they have going in Charlotte?
I mean, Charlotte, I think, is they have talent. I mean, Devontae Graham broke out last year. Terry Rozier had a great season last year, too. As much slack as he got in Boston, he was really good in Charlotte. They drafted a really good player in P.J. Washington.
I like P.J. Washington, and I like Bridges.
And Bridges is getting better. Like, because that's the thing with me, is that if I'm the Hornets, I pick Wiseman, because I think your starting center right now is Cody Zeller. Like, in Indiana, he was great. But in the NBA, he's been a solid center. He hasn't been a scrub, but he's been just a guy in the NBA. 10 points, 6 rebounds, that's what he gives you. I think Wiseman would be the pick there.
He's the better fit for them. No
Devontae Graham, Rozier, Miles Bridges,
P.J. Washington,
Wiseman. I think that's a good group of guys. And if Wiseman can even live up to a little bit of the potential that people expect out of him, then I think the Hornets will have something special with him there.
Yeah, and they have this great quote. They asked him about, you know, who he plays like, and he said, some people say Chris Bosh, Kevin Garnett, and even David Robinson, but really, I'm my own person. I want to create my own path. I want to be the next James Wiseman, so people look up to me one day, but I've patterned my game compared to those 3 players, so I just say it. And I've really been getting a lot of film from the Greek freak, Giannis, so I've been studying his game too. I've really just been trying to soak up as much information as I can. If he can even touch any of those 3 players.
I feel like every single NBA prospect says that.
Yeah, of course. But like you said, if he could even scratch the ceiling of his potential, it would jumpstart the Hornets rebuild tenfold. But for me, I just feel like right now the Hornets are so far away that, in my opinion, would be the worst landing spot. At least Minnesota has some star power. You get the feeling that with a good offseason, they could make some noise. I feel like no matter what Charlotte does this offseason, save for a Hail Mary pitch to Anthony Davis, they're not making any noise next season.
You know, when James Harden got drafted, he said that he is a combination of Manu Ginobili and Paul Pierce. I think in like the scouting combine or the draft, he said that.
That turned out to be pretty accurate in the end.
It did.
Wow.
But I don't know. I feel like every prospect says that about themselves. They want to carve like their own story, and it's all great. It sounds great, but I really want to see what he does. And obviously, we have to give him the opportunity to do that. but I really want to see what he does. The top 3 is going to definitely be interesting.